Alicia Ross murder case. Alicia Ross was a beautiful and young lady from Markham, Ontario, Canada, whose disappearance in August 2015 and the resulting investigation became the subject of international media coverage. Her disappearance was one of the most mysterious in recent memory. What could have lured a woman outside from her locked apartment in the middle of the night for a fateful encounter with her killer? The murder of Alicia Ross sparked one of the largest searches in Ontario history and ended with one of its shortest murder trials. Her neighbor, Daniel Sylvester, was found guilty of second-degree murder in the terrible crime and will serve a life sentence for his actions that night. What happened to Alicia Ross? Let's start this heartbreaking story with you. But before we start, don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to our channel to get some interesting stuff. On the morning of August 17, 2005, Alicia Ross, a Hewlett-Packard employee, mysteriously disappeared. Her boyfriend, Sean Hine, went to her house after she failed to answer a call on her cell phone for the second time. Nobody answered the door, even though Ross's car was still in the driveway. Hine immediately reported her disappearance to the police. He then contacted her family, and Ross's parents rushed home. Ross's mother, Sharon Fortis, later wrote, "Sean called 911 to report Alicia missing. He tried to reach her the night before when he got home. No response from her cell phone. No response again in the morning. She hadn't shown up for work. He then contacted my husband and I, and we rushed home to find the street covered with York Regional Police cars and the house filled with police officers, all looking for Alicia. In Alicia's room were her cell phone, her purse, her cigarettes, her keys. Her bed had not been slept in. Her laundry lay folded, ready to be put away. Her ring was by the bathroom sink. She'd washed for bed. Her car was in the driveway. She'd never gone to work. The backyard was strewn with Alicia's shoes, a glass, a cigarette, and the backyard gate had been left open. Sickness fell over us. The fact that none of Ross's important belongings were missing led police to suspect that something may have happened to her, although they did not immediately deem the case foul play. Initially, her current boyfriend and ex-boyfriend were questioned, although neither were reported to be suspects in the case. Hine was last seen Ross at 12 midnight the night before, and her family last saw her at 11 p.m. on August 16th. By August 19th, a police crew and 60 volunteers had been scouring nearby ravines around Moss's Markham, Ontario home. By August 20th, nearly 400 volunteers and over 60 police officers were participating in the search for Ross. Police had to turn down volunteers and requested only 100 volunteers per day to help them in their efforts. The search continued for several days and was reported on the American TV show America's Most Wanted. On August 22nd, Ross's boyfriend, Sean Hine, was arrested for drunk driving just hours after the police reported that they had shifted their focus from a missing person case to a possible case of foul play. The search was scaled down when Hine came under increased interrogation and was feeling the heat from the police investigation. On the 25th of August, Hine's neighborhood was canvassed. Although he was not a suspect, neighbors were asked whether they'd seen Hine taking out trash on August 17th or anything suspicious. On August 29th, the National Post reported that Ross's boyfriend, Sean Hine, had stopped cooperating with investigators and refused to take a polygraph test. However, in private phone calls with Ross's mother, Sharon Fortis, he had told her how much he misses her daughter and asked how she's coping. News began to surface that Hine considered himself pretty much the prime suspect of the investigation and of his somewhat unusual decision to report her missing after she failed to answer just 2 phone calls. Media attention to the case began to wane in late August due to the lack of new leads and the ongoing devastation of Hurricane Katrina in the southern United States. On September 2, 2005, the York Regional Police dismantled their campaign post in Thornhill, Ontario, because students were returning to the school they'd been using as their command center. The case lay dormant for over a week until Jennifer Teague, an 18-year-old woman in Ottawa, Ontario, was reported missing. And Ross's mother, Sharon Fortis, once again became the subject of stories about how she and the family were coping and looking for closure in Alicia's disappearance. On September 21st, over a month after Ross's initial disappearance, and just days after the body of slain 18-year-old Jennifer Teague was discovered, the Globe and Mail reported that the body of Alicia Ross had been found and that police had taken one person into custody. The body was found more than 50 miles from Ross's Markham home, where she was last seen by her family and her boyfriend of 6 weeks on the night of August 16th to a wooded area outside the small village of Coboconk. Ross's neighbor, 31-year-old Daniel Sylvester, was charged with second-degree homicide after turning himself in the company of a lawyer to police, the Edmonton Sun said. With public suspicions firmly focused on Sean Hine, Alicia's boyfriend and the last known person to have seen her before she disappeared, the news that her next-door neighbor, an enigmatic and little-known character on his own street, had been arrested shocked the city. Toronto Sun columnist Mike Strobel wrote an apology piece to Sean Hine on behalf of a presumptuous public, and Sean's father, Ken Hine, went on to speak to the Toronto Sun and set the record straight, saying that his son was going through a lot of emotions and finding out his girlfriend was murdered and not coming back. On October 6, 2005, more than 50 days after Alicia Ross's disappearance, friends, family, and mourners held an emotional farewell to Alicia Ross. 500 people filled into a Toronto, Ontario synagogue to mourn the passing of Alicia Ross. On January 19, 2006, Daniel Sylvester made a video court appearance in Newmarket, Ontario for his preliminary hearing. On January 20, 2006, CTV reported that the Ross and Fortis family was releasing a website, aliciaross.ca, in memory of Alicia Ross. In March 2006, Shannon Fortis announced the creation of a scholarship named after Alicia Ross and Greg Rogers, a boyfriend of Ross's who died in a car crash in 1999. The money would be raised by a Greg Rogers Memorial hockey game fundraiser. On July 4, 2006, Daniel Sylvester went to court for a preliminary hearing. The murder trial began on May 7, 2007, nearly a year and a half after Ross's initial disappearance. With a jury of 8 women and 4 men, Sylvester attempted to plead guilty to manslaughter in the death of Miss Ross, which would have suggested that the lawyers would try to argue the death was unintentional, but the plea was rejected by the court. Prosecutor Kelly Wright stated, "He told police he encountered her and they exchanged words. He slapped her on the face, he pushed her to the ground, and he drove his knee into her solar plexus several times. He took her head and banged it into the ground several times," the prosecutor said. Mr. Sylvester lined the inside of his trunk and put the body of Miss Ross inside. He cleaned up the blood, had a shower, and drove about 80 kilometers northeast of his home to a wooded area near the town of Manila. Some of the remains were transferred 3 weeks later by Mr. Sylvester to the Coboconk location, said Ms. Wright. Courtroom testimony saw Sylvester describing himself as a fringe individual who did not do well with other people. According to testimonies, Sylvester advanced upon Ross shortly after her boyfriend had left. Sylvester said that during the argument with Ross, she called him a name which made him snap. "She insulted me and called me a loser, and that's what really got me going," he said on video. Asked by McVady if he'd ever been called that name before, he responded, "Yes, many times throughout high school and even grade school. I just have social difficulties with other kids. I have anxiety problems," he said. McVady asked him to pen a letter to Ross and her family. "I don't know what I'd say," he told the detective as he started sobbing uncontrollably. In his confession to police, Sylvester stated that he had also confessed to a Catholic priest at a nearby church. The trial was based on the question of whether Sylvester had intended to kill Ross, which would lead to a second-degree murder conviction, or whether there was no premeditation nor intention to kill Ross, which would lead to a manslaughter conviction. In the end, after 3 hours and 45 minutes of deliberation, the jury was beyond a reasonable doubt in their decision that Sylvester either intended to kill his next-door neighbor Ross between their Markham houses on August 17, 2005, or that he had used force he knew could kill her and acted reckless in allowing the death to happen. Sylvester was convicted of second-degree murder and given a life sentence with no parole possibility for 16 years. The earliest he'll be eligible for parole is September 20th, 2021. Alicia has everything to live for. She has a family who loved her, a house she loved living in, a job she adored, and a new romance. While Alicia was busy making plans for her bright future and creating new opportunities for herself, she had no idea that there was such a darkness so close to her. Canadian singer-songwriter Kathleen Edwards, on her 2008 album Asking for Flowers, wrote a song entitled Alicia Ross, written from the perspective of the young woman in the last moments of her life. This is all about today's story. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share the video with your friends.